What's up guys, today we're going to be going over the new Stasis aspects and fragments that you can get this season, and we'll just be going over exactly what they all do. That way in future videos with builds, I don't have to go over exactly what they all do, and you guys will have a video to go back to and see exactly what they all do more precisely. And since this season launched, there's been a lot of talk about nerfing Stasis for PvP, and those players have all the reasons in the world to be upset. This video is just going to be talking about what they all do in PvE. I've been making a video like this every single season, so I'm just doing my thing. Also, my code AIR is going to be 30% off on G Fuel through the 17th. So if you need to restock or try some new flavors, this will be the best time. I definitely recommend trying to get the XQC flavor, the juice. It's definitely become my favorite flavor overall. It has been sold out quite often, so if you get a chance to get a tub, I definitely recommend picking one up. Anyways, let's go ahead and begin with the video. So to get the aspect questlines and fragments, just go to the Exo Stranger on Europa, like you have every single season. I did not record any of the steps of the quest lines. They're pretty much the exact same as they have been. So if you've done them before, you know how to do them. And once you're done with the aspects, you'll be able to choose 2 of the 4 fragments this week and then get the last 2 next week. So looking at the new Warlock aspect, Glacial Harvest, freezing targets create stasis shards around the frozen targets. Higher tier combatants create more shards. So this one is pretty straightforward. Whenever you freeze a target, it'll spawn in a stasis shard. When you pick those up, you'll get melee energy by default. And with all the different ways to freeze targets on Warlock, that'll be happening quite often. So you're going to be getting a lot of melee energy with this aspect on. And one thing that is interesting is with the Ice Flare Bullets aspect, where it'll chain to more and more targets, it doesn't seem to spawn shards very consistently. I think there is like a cooldown on how often the shards can be spawned in, and it might not actually have anything to do with the Ice Flare Bullets itself. It might just be a kind of like a cooldown to how often the shards can even be spawned in from this aspect in general. But overall with this aspect, there'll be shards all over the place on Warlock, especially if you can use my Stasis turret build once that aspect is re-enabled. If you freeze a major target, it'll spawn in 2 shards. Then if you freeze a boss, it will spawn in 3. And I did test a strike boss also to see if that was different than a lost sector boss, and once again it was 3. So it seems like 3 is the max from a single target. So overall this aspect is really cool because it's the first way to create stasis shards on Warlock, which is good because there's all kinds of fragments that take advantage of shards and there's no way to create them before on Warlock. Now moving on to the Hunter aspect, the one that's causing all the issues in PvP. Touch of Winter. Your Glacier, Duskfield, and Cold Snap grenades have enhanced functionality. Glacier grenades add a stasis crystal and change the formation. Duskfield grenades increase slow field size, increase a small stasis crystal on impact. Then Cold Snap grenades, Seeker travels further, faster, and chains 1 additional time. So looking at what it does for the Glacial grenade, first without it, it will spawn in 5 crystals, which is how it's been forever. Now if you go and put on the aspect, it will create 6 now in a circle, which is pretty interesting because you'll be able to entrap more enemies in PvE with that circle. Overall, just take up more area in PvE and freeze more targets. Then for the Duskfield grenade, without the aspect on, as you see, the radius of the field is pretty much to the top of the garage. Now with the aspect on, it's going to be quite a lot larger, where it's going to be several feet, meters, whatever you want to call it, above the garage now, and it will create a crystal right in the middle on impact, which is pretty interesting because you'll be able to use Whisper of Shards with something other than Glacier Grenade for the first time, which means you'll get that 5-second grenade recharge rate reduction, which is really cool that you can pair that with something other than Glacier Grenade now. And finally, with the Cold Snap grenades, usually it only goes to 3 or 4 targets, depending on how close things are. But now with the aspect on, it can go to 1 additional. So in a situation where it might have only went to 3, it'll go to 4. If it went to 4, it'll go to 5. It's going to be able to go to 1 additional target now. And the secrets travel a lot quicker and further, which means not only will it go to 1 additional target when you throw it, but now it's also more likely to chain the maximum amount of times because of how fast and how far it will travel. So overall, this aspect is really cool in PvE. The thing that excites me the most is the Duskfield grenade creating a stasis crystal also, because of the fact that you can pair that with the fragment to pretty much have infinite Duskfield grenades, and it's the first time you can pair that Whisper of Shards fragment with something other than Glacier Grenade. Now moving on to the Titan one, Diamond Lance. Shatter or defeat targets with stasis abilities to create a stasis lance. Throw the lance to freeze targets, or you can slam it on the ground to freeze targets in a small area. So this one is pretty straightforward. Pretty much anytime you kill a frozen target or kill them with one of your abilities, for example your melee, it'll create a stasis lance, which you can then pick up and walk around with, and you can do either a throw or a slam. Both of them pretty much have the same radius. One will just go obviously straight down and one will have range. And one thing to note is that there is a cooldown on how often you can create a lance. As you see, the second you throw it, there's a 7-second cooldown. And as long as you wait for that cooldown, you can pretty much just chain the lance over and over again. And as I mentioned, the radius is pretty good. If they're pretty close to each other, it will shatter or freeze all of them. So overall, this lance is pretty cool. One thing I noticed is if you leave the lance on the ground, it will last for 25 seconds. But once you pick it up, as you'll see right here, the lance will despawn in 10 seconds. So if there's a situation where you have a lance on the ground and there's no enemies, you're waiting for like the next wave of enemies to spawn in, it's better to leave it on the ground than pick it up because it will last a lot longer on the ground than in your hands. So I would definitely recommend doing that. But overall, the lance is very cool. It's pretty much just a fourth ability along with your barricade, melee, and grenade, and that is the way you should pretty much treat it. Now moving on to the fragments, there is only 4 you can choose this season. The first one I want to show off is the Whisper of Rending. Kinetic weapons do increase damage to stasis crystals and frozen targets. So the first part of that, if we just throw a glacial grenade on the ground without the fragment on, it takes 5 shots of this SMG to break a crystal. Now with the fragment on, it will only take 4, so that's gonna be roughly like a 25% increase to damage versus crystals, which is kind of cool, but not, you know, anything too crazy. But the crazy part about this fragment that makes it pretty broken is the increase of damage to frozen targets. So with this fragment on, you will have a 50% increase to damage versus frozen targets with kinetic weapons, which is quite a lot. And as you might have seen, it is stacking with other buffs in the game. For example, Whisper of Hedrons, the one where you get a damage buff after freezing a target, which obviously pairs extremely well with this one because it works versus the frozen targets. So the first thing I thought the second I saw this fragment is Izanagi's Burden. Does it work with Izanagi's Burden? So looking at the damage on Carl without the fragment was 130k. Now we go ahead and put the fragment on. Unfortunately, as you see, it still is 130,000. So I was like, does it just not work on bosses? So I took my SMG back that we saw worked earlier in the Lost Sector, and it does work with the SMG on Carl. So it's not a boss thing. As you saw, it works with the SMG, but not the Izanagi's Burden. So I went ahead and tested a few different situations, and it seems like it just doesn't work with kinetic special weapons, only kinetic primary weapons, which is pretty confusing because it says kinetic weapons, not kinetic primary weapons. And I did test to see if it works with energy primaries, and it did not. So it's only kinetic primaries that it seems to work with, which I don't know if that is a bug, but if it worked with kinetic specials, that would have been crazy. The next fragment I want to talk about is Whisper of Hunger. Increases the melee energy gain from picking up stasis shards. So this one can work on all characters now that they all have a way to create shards, and usually without the fragment on, you still get a pretty decent amount of melee energy every single time you pick up one of these shards. As you saw in roughly 4, I got about half of my melee back, but now with the fragment on, those same 4 shards, I get almost like 80% of my melee back. And keep in mind, I have really low strength right now, and this will be based off that stat, so the higher that is, the more melee energy you get from each shard. And with 4, you probably easily get your entire melee back if you had a lot higher strength. The next fragment I want to show off is Whisper of Rhyme, which is when you collect a stasis shard, you'll get a small amount of overshield, which falls off after 10 seconds. Collecting additional shards will increase the overshield and refresh the timer. So this one, whenever you pick up a shard, you get a very, very small amount of overshield. It's pretty much not even visible with only 1 shard. But as you pick up more and more, obviously that shield will get a lot higher. As you see, if I pick up about 5 shards, I will have roughly 60% of an overshield, and that will fall off after 10 seconds. But if I keep picking up more and more shards, it will refresh the timer. So depending on the situation, if you have multiple people making shards, you can definitely keep that overshield going for pretty much forever. And the last fragment is Whisper of Conduction, which I don't have on my count or any of my friends' count. None of us took it. And what it does is nearby stasis shards track to your position. So pretty much you'll just turn it into a vacuum, and the shards will kind of gravitate towards you, which will be pretty nice for situations where there's gonna be all kinds of these all over the place. But at the same time, when you only have 3 or 4 fragments to choose from, there are so many good options that will benefit you greatly that I don't really think one like this that is just for convenience sake of not having to walk to the shards is really worth taking over one of those better options. So overall, the fragments are based off stasis shards, which is pretty interesting now that all characters can create them. So there's definitely going to be quite a few new builds just based off the stuff this season. And overall, all 3 of the aspects are pretty cool in PvE. I think that's me it for the video. There will definitely be builds with all these different aspects and fragments coming soon this season. Yeah, anyways, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.